Have you been searching for confirmation? Try to discern whether God is actually moving in the area of your love life, or if you're just waiting in silence. We tend to expect divine direction to arrive with thunder and lightning, accompanied by unmistakable supernatural events. But here's what most people miss. When heaven is orchestrating your romantic future, the evidence often appears in whispers, not shouts, in gentle shifts, not seismic revelations. Today, I'm unveiling 6 unmistakable indicators that heaven is actively positioning you toward the person he's been preparing for your life. Sign 1. Your desperation has been replaced with contentment. The first indicator that God is guiding your love story is this. You've noticed a dramatic shift from anxious striving to genuine contentment. This isn't a fake peace that comes from giving up or numbing yourself. This is the authentic, supernatural rest that the Apostle Paul describes in Philippians 4 verse 7. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. When heaven is writing your romance, something settles deep in your soul. The panic subsides. The compulsive need to control outcomes dissolves. You stop refreshing dating apps obsessively and start resting in divine timing. You're no longer manufacturing opportunities, manipulating situations, or forcing chemistry where it doesn't naturally exist. Instead, there's a quiet confidence, a knowing that something sacred is being arranged even though your physical eyes see nothing yet. Think about Moses at the burning bush in Exodus 3. For 40 years, he lived in Midian's wilderness, tending sheep, seemingly forgotten. But during those quiet years in the desert, God was preparing him. Moses wasn't striving or scheming his way back to Egypt. He was simply being faithful where God had placed him. And it was in that place of contentment, not desperation, that God appeared and revealed his next assignment. The same principle applies to your love life. God often moves when you stop striving and start resting. Ask yourself honestly, are you still operating from a place of fear? Terrified you'll end up alone, convinced you're running out of time, desperately grasping at any possibility? Or has something fundamentally shifted? Have you found yourself surprisingly at peace, even though your relationship status hasn't changed? That inner calm isn't random. It's heaven's fingerprint on your situation. This doesn't mean your desire for partnership has vanished. It means fear is no longer your decision maker. You're not compromising your values out of loneliness anymore. You're not tolerating disrespect just to avoid being single. You've arrived at a place where you understand, in the core of your being, that God sees you. He hasn't overlooked you, and what he's orchestrating will exceed anything you could rush into on your own. Remember this truth. Human anxiety produces frantic activity. Divine timing produces rest. If you're experiencing a peace that defies your circumstances, especially after seasons of emotional turmoil, don't dismiss it as resignation. Recognize it as confirmation. God is moving pieces on a chessboard you cannot see, and your inexplicable peace is proof that his strategy is unfolding perfectly. Sign 2. Dead-end relationships are ending and fresh opportunities are emerging. The second indicator heaven is directing your path is this. You're witnessing a clear pattern of relationships ending and unexpected possibilities appearing. And while those endings may have devastated you initially, with time you're beginning to recognize them as divine intervention, not cruel rejection. The wisdom of Proverbs 16 verse 9 declares, "The mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." When God is steering you toward your destined partner, he will systematically eliminate people and circumstances that would derail his purposes for your life. That situationship that imploded, that person who ghosted you without explanation, that connection that stalled despite your best efforts, stop calling them losses. Start recognizing them as divine course corrections. Simultaneously, you'll start noticing fresh pathways appearing, opportunities you never pursued or even imagined. Perhaps it's a career transition that relocates you geographically. Perhaps it's a volunteer position that exposes you to a completely different community. Perhaps it's a friendship invitation that expands your network in unexpected ways. These aren't coincidental developments. They're strategic positioning. Consider the narrative of Isaac's servant in Genesis 24. Abraham commissioned him to find a bride for Isaac, and the servant prayed earnestly for unmistakable direction. Before his prayer was even complete, Rebekah arrived at the well, precisely where divine appointment had orchestrated precisely when it needed to happen. That wasn't fortunate timing. That was God opening the exact door at the exact moment. The identical process is occurring in your life right now. God is shutting what must be closed and unveiling what must be revealed. Your responsibility isn't to pry open locked doors or cling desperately to what God is trying to extract from your hands. Your responsibility is to step through the entrances He opens and trust that His navigation is flawless. So stay observant. Which relationships have recently dissolved? What fresh possibilities are surfacing in your life? Because God's redirections are often His method of positioning you directly in the path of the person He's been preparing all along. Sign 3. Your character is transforming in ways you can't manufacture. The third indicator God is guiding you toward your future spouse is this. You're undergoing profound internal transformation. And this isn't superficial self-improvement you're forcing through willpower. This is authentic metamorphosis that's happening as you yield to God's refining process. When heaven is readying you for the right relationship, He addresses your interior world first. He confronts your wounds, reshapes your thinking patterns, heals your trauma responses, and elevates your spiritual consciousness. You begin recognizing fundamental changes in how you operate. You respond with greater patience. You extend forgiveness more freely. Your sense of identity comes from Christ's love, not from being validated by potential partners. Galatians 5 verses 22 to 23 outlines the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. If these qualities are intensifying in your life without forced effort, that's evidence. God is cultivating within you the spiritual maturity necessary to sustain a covenant relationship. Your discernment is also sharpening dramatically. You're no longer captivated by what used to mesmerize you. Warning signs you previously rationalized now register immediately and clearly. You're not dazzled anymore by external packaging, physical attractiveness, social influence, superficial charm. Instead, you're drawn to authenticity, integrity, spiritual hunger, and mission alignment. Reflect on Joseph's journey in Genesis. Before he could walk into his destiny and marry Asenath, he endured years of false accusation, slavery, and imprisonment. The pit, Potiphar's household, and the dungeon weren't distractions from his purpose. They were laboratories for character development. By the time he stood before Egypt's throne, he was no longer the arrogant teenager who boasted about his visions. He had become a man of humility, wisdom, and unshakable faith. God is executing the same transformation in you. This season isn't empty or meaningless. It's purposeful and intentional. Every hardship you're processing, every insecurity that's being healed, every degree of wisdom you're acquiring, it's all preparation for recognizing and honoring the relationship God is positioning. If you can reflect on recent months and identify genuine growth, that's confirmation. God is developing you because He's preparing to entrust you with something valuable that requires your readiness. Sign 4. Certain people or places keep appearing in your journey. The fourth indicator heaven is orchestrating your path is this. You keep encountering specific individuals or environments in ways that seem to defy random chance. Perhaps it's someone from your past who keeps reappearing in your present. Perhaps it's a name that surfaces repeatedly in unrelated conversations. Perhaps it's a location you feel inexplicably drawn toward without logical explanation. God frequently arranges repeated intersections as His method of capturing your attention. Ruth wasn't husband hunting when she arrived in Boaz's field. She was simply providing for Naomi through honest labor. But Scripture records in Ruth 2 verse 3 that her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz. That hap wasn't accidental. It was divine orchestration disguised as ordinary circumstance. Now, let me clarify something crucial. This doesn't mean you should engineer encounters or manufacture connections. And not every repeated interaction carries spiritual significance. But when God is genuinely leading you, there's typically a pattern of divine synchronization that becomes difficult to rationalize away. You consistently end up in the same space. You keep having substantive exchanges. You keep witnessing evidence that something beyond your control is being choreographed. Pay attention to where God keeps positioning you. Who continues emerging in your environment? What settings are you being repeatedly drawn toward? Because God doesn't orchestrate meaningless encounters. If He's consistently placing someone or something in your pathway, it warrants pausing to inquire, God, what are you highlighting for me here? And notice this critical detail. These intersections typically occur when you're operating in obedience, not when you're scheming or manipulating. Ruth was faithfully serving. Isaac was in meditation. Rebekah was completing her daily responsibilities. They were all simply being faithful in their current assignments when divine connection manifested. So if you're observing patterns, resist dismissing them as imagination. Bring them to God in prayer. Request clarity and confirmation. And trust that if He's orchestrating something significant, He'll make it increasingly undeniable as His timeline unfolds. Sign 5. Spiritually mature voices affirm what your spirit is sensing. The fifth indicator God is directing you toward your covenant partner is this: mature, godly individuals in your life begin affirming what you're discerning internally. This principle is vital because Proverbs 11 verse 14 instructs us, where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety. When heaven is genuinely guiding you, He rarely speaks exclusively in private. He frequently validates it through spiritually mature mentors, family members, pastoral leaders, and trustworthy friends who know your character, genuinely love you, and desire God's perfect will for your life. These aren't people swayed by superficial attraction or temporary emotions. They perceive through spiritual lenses. They intercede. They communicate truth even when it's difficult to receive. Examine biblical patterns. When Boaz desired to marry Ruth, he didn't operate impulsively on emotion alone. He presented himself before the city elders and made his intentions publicly accountable and official. He honored proper protocol and sought legitimate confirmation. When a relationship between Isaac and Rebekah was forming, Abraham's servant consulted with her family members and received their blessing before proceeding. Heaven honors divine order and proper confirmation. If every person who authentically knows you and walks closely with God is expressing concern about a potential relationship, that's not criticism or jealousy. That's potentially God's protection speaking through His body. Conversely, if mature, discerning believers are experiencing peace and confirmation about a connection you're exploring, that carries significant weight. That's God utilizing His church community to validate what He's already deposited in your heart. Now, understand, this doesn't require unanimous approval from every acquaintance in your life. But it does mean you should genuinely value input from those who are spiritually grounded, who consistently intercede for you, and who have demonstrated fruit and wisdom in their own journeys. Don't isolate yourself when making significant decisions. Welcome godly perspective. Remain open to uncomfortable truths. And trust that God will employ the voices of wise counselors to either confirm or redirect your trajectory. If the people who know you most intimately and love God most passionately are saying, "There's something different about this situation. I'm sensing peace here. I'm witnessing God's involvement in this," don't casually dismiss that feedback. That's often heaven's method of providing the confirmation you've been desperately seeking. Sign 6. Your prayers are shifting from desperation to alignment. The sixth and final indicator that God is leading you toward your soulmate is this: the nature of your prayers is fundamentally changing. You're no longer begging God for just anyone. You're asking Him for the right one. You're no longer praying out of panic. You're praying with purpose and alignment. When God is preparing to answer your prayers for a life partner, He first transforms how you pray. Your requests become more specific, more spiritually focused, and more aligned with kingdom priorities. Instead of praying, "God, please send me someone, anyone, so I won't be alone," you're now praying, "God, send me someone who will sharpen my faith, align with my calling, and help me fulfill your purposes." This shift is significant because it reveals internal growth. You're no longer willing to settle for companionship at the expense of godliness. You're no longer prioritizing chemistry over character. You're no longer desperate for a relationship that merely makes you feel good. You're interceding for a covenant that makes you more like Christ. Consider Hannah in 1 Samuel 1. She prayed for a son not just to end her barrenness, but with a promise to dedicate him to God's service. Her prayer wasn't self-centered, it was kingdom-centered, and God honored that alignment. When your prayers shift from "meet my needs" to "align with your will," you position yourself to receive what God has been preparing all along. You'll also notice that you're praying with greater faith and less anxiety. There's a quiet confidence in your intercession. You're not frantically demanding timelines or manipulating outcomes through spiritual bargaining. Instead, you're surrendering the how and when to God while remaining faithful in the now. You trust that if God has placed a desire in your heart, He will fulfill it in His perfect timing. Psalm 37 verse 4 says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." When your delight is in Him, your desires begin to align with His desires. And when that alignment happens, prayer becomes less about convincing God and more about cooperating with what He's already ordained. So examine your prayer life. How have your prayers changed over the past months or year? Are you still anxiously begging, or are you confidently trusting? Are you demanding your way or surrendering to His way? Because when your prayers shift from desperation to alignment, that's often the final indicator that God is about to move in ways you've been faithfully waiting for. If this message resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more biblical encouragement on faith, purpose, and relationships. Your story is still unfolding, and the best chapter is yet to come. God bless you.